The God most of us grew up learning about, the one who supposedly created Adam and Eve, isn't who you think he is. In fact, according to ancient, banned texts hidden for centuries, this God might not be God at all. He's a fraud, a tyrant, a deceiver. His name? Yaldabaoth. This is directly from the Gnostic scriptures like the Apocryphon of John and the Reality of the Rulers. These are ancient writings the Church fought to suppress, and here's why. Yaldabaoth is described as a flawed, arrogant being who claims, "I am God and there is no other." But here's the catch, he's not the true God. He's not the transcendent, all-loving creator. According to the Gnostics, he's a lesser, ignorant entity who created the physical world, not as a gift to humanity, but as a prison. That's right. The world we live in, the one we're told was made with love and purpose, is actually a trap, a place to keep us blind, ignorant, and enslaved. Now, let's talk about Adam. In the traditional story, Adam is this passive figure molded from clay, obedient to God, and punished for disobedience. But in these banned texts, Adam isn't a fool. He's the first victim of Yaldabaoth's lies, and the first rebel against his tyranny. Gnostic accounts reveal that Adam didn't blindly worship this so-called creator. Instead, he recognized something was wrong. He realized the entity demanding obedience wasn't divine perfection but a flawed, jealous dictator masquerading as God. Here's where it gets even more fascinating. Adam wasn't alone in this revelation. Enter Sophia, a divine being central to Gnostic cosmology. She's the one who accidentally created Yaldabaoth, her spiritual mistake born out of a desire to create without her divine counterpart. Regretting her error, Sophia intervenes. She implants a spark of divine knowledge, gnosis, into Adam. That spark is what makes Adam different, what gives him the capacity to question, to resist, and to seek truth. But Yaldabaoth wasn't about to let that happen without a fight. He's the one who traps Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. And that famous tree of knowledge? It wasn't some forbidden fruit meant to test humanity. It was a symbol of liberation, a way for Adam and Eve to access the truth about the world they were trapped in. And guess who encouraged them to eat it? Not Yaldabaoth. The serpent, often vilified in mainstream Christianity, plays a completely different role in Gnostic tradition. It's not the devil. It's a liberator. Think about the narrative shift here. The serpent wasn't trying to lead humanity into sin. It was trying to free Adam and Eve from ignorance, from a creator who wanted them enslaved. The fall of man, according to the Gnostics, wasn't a fall at all, it was the beginning of awakening. And Yaldabaoth? He reacts exactly how you'd expect a tyrant to react. When Adam and Eve gain knowledge, he punishes them. He curses them. He casts them out of the garden, not because they disobeyed some divine plan, but because they saw through the illusion. They recognized the prison for what it was. What's more, the Gnostics believed that this struggle wasn't just Adam's battle, it's humanity's battle. The physical world, full of suffering, chaos, and control, was Yaldabaoth's creation. His goal? To keep us distracted, enslaved, and unaware of our true divine nature. The Gnostic texts, unearthed in 1945 at Nag Hammadi, Egypt, reveal an entirely different story of creation. These aren't random fan fictions, they're ancient scriptures written by early Christian sects that were later branded as heretics by the Roman Church. Why? Because their ideas challenged the foundation of the Church's authority. If the God of the Old Testament isn't the true God, then what does that say about the institutions that worship him? The Gnostics describe Yaldabaoth as the demiurge, a Greek term that translates to artisan or craftsman. But don't be fooled by the name, this isn't the skilled artist you'd hope for. Yaldabaoth didn't create out of love or divine inspiration. He created out of ignorance and self-delusion. According to texts like the Secret Book of John, Yaldabaoth came into existence through a cosmic mistake. He was formed without the consent of the true divine realm, the Pleroma, a realm of pure light and unity beyond anything we can comprehend. Yaldabaoth didn't even realize he was a mistake. In his ignorance, he believed he was the only God. Think about that level of delusion. He creates the material world, not as a gift to humanity, but as a reflection of his own fractured nature. The Gnostics describe him as malformed, with the face of a lion and the body of a serpent, a grotesque mix that symbolizes his chaotic and predatory essence. What's even more shocking is how Yaldabaoth runs his creation. He doesn't rule alone. He surrounds himself with a group of lesser beings, known as Archons. These Archons are like his enforcers, entities designed to manipulate and control the human experience. Their purpose? To keep us distracted, enslaved, and ignorant of the truth that the physical world is not our home. The Gnostics didn't see the material world as inherently good. They saw it as a prison, a system designed to trap our divine essence, our spark of light. And who's the warden of this prison? Yaldabaoth. His methods are cunning. He uses suffering, chaos, and even religion to keep humanity in line. According to Gnostic writings, Yaldabaoth's ultimate trick is convincing us that he's the true God, that his rules and his punishments are absolute. The Gnostics describe how Yaldabaoth uses fear to maintain control. Fear of death, fear of sin, fear of punishment, it's all part of his playbook. By keeping humanity afraid and ignorant, Yaldabaoth ensures that we don't question the system. But there's more. He doesn't just manipulate through fear. He actively distorts the truth. The Gnostics believed that Yaldabaoth created false systems of knowledge, what we might call dogmas or ideologies, that keep humanity chasing illusions instead of seeking the deeper, spiritual truths of the divine realm. Yaldabaoth's arrogance is another key feature of his rule. In the Apocryphon of John, he famously declares, "I am a jealous God, and there is no other God besides me." Sound familiar? That's because this line echoes parts of the Old Testament, specifically the words of Yahweh. Now, the Gnostics weren't necessarily claiming that the God of the Bible is Yaldabaoth. What they were saying is that many of the traits attributed to God in traditional religion, jealousy, wrath, punishment, are characteristics of the demiurge, not the true divine source. And here's the kicker: Yaldabaoth doesn't want humanity to wake up. He doesn't want us to realize that our essence comes from a realm far beyond his control. That's why he forbids Adam and Eve from eating the fruit of the tree of knowledge. To Yaldabaoth, knowledge is dangerous. It's the one thing that can dismantle his illusion of power. Forget the sanitized version of the story that paints Adam as a puppet in the hands of a benevolent God. The Gnostic texts reveal something far more intriguing. Adam was a conscious, defiant figure who refused to bow to Yaldabaoth's tyranny. When Yaldabaoth created Adam, it wasn't out of kindness. It was out of self-interest. The Gnostic texts describe how Yaldabaoth formed Adam from matter but couldn't give him life. Despite his arrogance, Yaldabaoth lacked the divine spark, the essence of true life. He was forced to call upon the higher, unknowable God to breathe life into Adam. This divine essence, planted within Adam, became his greatest weapon, a connection to the true source that Yaldabaoth could never fully control. As soon as Adam came to life, Yaldabaoth demanded that he worship him. But Adam didn't. According to texts like the Hypostasis of the Archons, Adam remained silent, refusing to acknowledge Yaldabaoth as God. Think about what that represents: the first human, fully aware of his divine origin, refusing to bow to a false deity. It's a moment of profound rebellion, and it sets the stage for everything that follows. Of course, Yaldabaoth didn't take this defiance lightly. He and his Archons, the enforcers of his rule, tried to subjugate Adam in other ways. They confined him in the Garden of Eden, a space not of divine perfection but of controlled ignorance. The Gnostic perspective on Eden flips the script entirely. Instead of being a paradise, it was a gilded cage, a place designed to keep Adam docile and unaware of the greater truth. But Adam's spark of divine knowledge couldn't be contained. According to the secret book of John, Sophia, the divine being who inadvertently created Yaldabaoth, took pity on Adam. She sent emissaries of light to guide and awaken him. These divine interventions are what allowed Adam to realize the nature of his prison and the tyrant who ruled over it. And then comes the turning point, the moment Adam eats from the tree of knowledge. This wasn't an act of disobedience but one of enlightenment. Gnostic texts describe how Adam's eyes were opened not just to good and evil, as traditional interpretations suggest, but to the full reality of his situation. He saw Yaldabaoth for what he truly was, not a god, but a fraud. His awakening wasn't just personal, it was universal. By rejecting Yaldabaoth as authority, Adam set an example for humanity. The Gnostics saw him as the first to challenge the lie that the material world and its rulers are ultimate. Adam's refusal to submit was a declaration of spiritual independence, a recognition that the spark within him belonged to something far greater than Yaldabaoth. Yaldabaoth's response to Adam's awakening was predictably tyrannical. He cast Adam out of the garden, cursed him with labor and suffering, and made his life as difficult as possible. But here's the key: these weren't punishments for disobedience. They were acts of desperation by a ruler losing his grip. Yaldabaoth's actions reveal his fear of Adam's knowledge, his awareness that humanity, once enlightened, could escape his control. Let's step back for a moment and look at the bigger picture. Yaldabaoth, as described in the Gnostic texts, isn't a unique figure. In fact, the characteristics attributed to him, arrogance, jealousy, and a desire to dominate, mirror traits of gods found in other ancient mythologies. Take Zeus from Greek mythology. At first glance, he might seem like a noble god, the ruler of Mount Olympus. But dig deeper into the myths, and you'll see a darker side. Zeus is a god who asserts his power through force, deception, and manipulation. He overthrows his own father, Cronus, to seize control of the cosmos. Sound familiar? Just like Yaldabaoth, Zeus relies on domination to maintain his authority, often punishing those who dare to challenge him. Prometheus, for instance, defies Zeus by giving fire to humanity, a gift that empowers humans and symbolizes knowledge. Zeus's response? He chains Prometheus to a rock and subjects him to eternal torment. The parallels to Yaldabaoth punishing Adam and Eve for gaining knowledge are hard to ignore. Then there's Enlil, a god from Mesopotamian mythology. Enlil is often portrayed as a harsh and authoritarian figure. In the story of the Great Flood, Enlil decides to wipe out humanity because their noise and chaos disturb him. This isn't the action of a benevolent creator, it's the act of a god who sees humans as an inconvenience, as something to be controlled or destroyed when they no longer serve his purpose. Compare this to Yaldabaoth's behavior in the Garden of Eden. Both gods are intolerant of humanity stepping outside the bounds of their imposed order. Even in Norse mythology, we see echoes of this archetype. Odin, while celebrated as wise and all-knowing, is not without his flaws. He's a manipulative figure who sacrifices others for his own gain and maintains control through fear and secrecy. The Gnostics would likely recognize a bit of Yaldabaoth in Odin's calculated pursuit of power and knowledge, often at the expense of those he governs. What's fascinating is how these myths share a recurring theme, a central figure of authority who uses their power not to uplift humanity, but to suppress and dominate them. It's almost as if these stories are trying to tell us something about the nature of power itself, how it corrupts, isolates, and demands submission. But here's where Yaldabaoth stands apart. Unlike Zeus or Enlil, Yaldabaoth is not a divine being in the traditional sense. He's a counterfeit god, created through an error, disconnected from the true source of divine wisdom. This makes his rule even more unstable, his actions more desperate. He's not governing out of inherent superiority, but out of fear, a fear that humanity might one day see through his illusion and realize that he's not the ultimate power in the universe. What's also interesting is the way these myths and their tyrannical gods often have challengers, figures who push back against the oppression. Prometheus, Loki, and even humanity itself in the Mesopotamian flood stories all represent rebellion against unjust authority. In Gnosticism, this role falls to Adam, Eve, and the serpent. They're not villains or sinners in this context, they're liberators who expose the flaws in Yaldabaoth's rule and open the door to a greater understanding of the cosmos. If Yaldabaoth is the tyrant of this story, then Sophia is the rogue architect who tries to undo the damage caused by her own mistake. In Gnostic cosmology, Sophia is a pivotal figure, not just a passive character or a background deity, but an active force working to awaken humanity. Without her intervention, Adam would have remained a soulless creation, blindly serving Yaldabaoth's agenda. Sophia's story begins with her bold decision to create without the consent of the divine source, known as the Pleroma. Unlike Yaldabaoth, who is driven by arrogance, Sophia's action stems from a desire to manifest something new. But her unilateral act produces an unintended consequence: Yaldabaoth, a malformed and arrogant entity who lacks true divine wisdom. Realizing the chaos she's unleashed, Sophia doesn't abandon her creation. Instead, she becomes a key player in humanity's awakening, working from behind the scenes to counteract Yaldabaoth's domination. When Yaldabaoth creates Adam, he does so to reinforce his authority, but there's one problem: Adam is lifeless, inert. Despite his claims of being the supreme god, Yaldabaoth cannot bring Adam to life. Sophia seizes this opportunity. She secretly imbues Adam with a fragment of divine light, a spark of the Pleroma. This spark is what separates humanity from the Archons and even from Yaldabaoth himself. It's the seed of Gnosis, the knowledge of our true origin and purpose. This divine spark in Adam wasn't just an act of defiance against Yaldabaoth. It was a calculated move by Sophia to set humanity on a path toward liberation. Sophia understood that the physical world Yaldabaoth created was a trap, a realm of illusion designed to keep humanity ignorant of their true divine nature. By giving Adam the capacity for knowledge and self-awareness, she planted the first seeds of resistance against this false reality. But Yaldabaoth wasn't oblivious. He knew something had changed in Adam. That's why he tried to control Adam's environment, confining him to the Garden of Eden. From Yaldabaoth's perspective, Eden wasn't a paradise but a containment zone, a place where Adam could be kept ignorant of his divine spark. What Yaldabaoth didn't anticipate was Sophia's persistence. Sophia didn't just stop at giving Adam the spark. She sent emissaries, beings of light and wisdom, to guide Adam and ensure he would one day realize the truth about his existence. These guides were part of Sophia's larger strategy to counter Yaldabaoth's control, ensuring that humanity would have access to the tools needed to break free. The role of the serpent in the Eden narrative is directly tied to Sophia's intervention. In Gnostic tradition, the serpent isn't a symbol of evil or temptation, but a messenger of Sophia. It was through the serpent that Sophia delivered the knowledge of good and evil to Adam and Eve. This wasn't a betrayal of humanity, as the traditional narrative would have us believe. It was an act of liberation, giving Adam and Eve the ability to see through the lies and manipulation of Yaldabaoth. What's fascinating about Sophia's role is how it redefines the concept of salvation. In traditional religious frameworks, salvation often comes from obedience to divine authority. In the Gnostic narrative, salvation comes from rebellion, from the recognition of truth and the rejection of falsehood. Sophia's gift to humanity isn't about enforcing rules or demanding worship. It's about empowering humanity to recognize their divine origin and break free from the oppressive systems imposed by Yaldabaoth and his Archons. In mainstream interpretations of Genesis, the Tree of Knowledge is painted as a test of obedience, a forbidden fruit that led to humanity's downfall. But in the Gnostic texts, this tree isn't a symbol of sin or disobedience. It's a key to liberation, a gateway to understanding the truth that Yaldabaoth worked so hard to keep hidden. Here's the deal: Yaldabaoth never wanted Adam and Eve to eat from the Tree of Knowledge because knowledge is power. It's the one thing that can dismantle his rule and expose him as the fraud he truly is. Think about it. What's the first thing Yaldabaoth does when Adam and Eve eat the fruit? He panics. He doesn't just punish them, he actively drives them out of the garden. Why? Because their newfound knowledge threatens the very foundation of his control. The Gnostic texts, such as the Secret Book of John, describe the Tree of Knowledge as more than just a tree. It's a symbol of the divine spark within humanity, a representation of the higher truths that Yaldabaoth could never touch. Eating from this tree wasn't an act of rebellion against a benevolent creator. It was an act of awakening. Adam and Eve didn't fall, they rose. They saw the world for what it truly was, a construct designed to keep them in ignorance. The Tree of Knowledge wasn't just a random element in the garden. It was deliberately placed there, not by Yaldabaoth, but by Sophia and the forces of the Pleroma. It was a hidden lifeline, a way for Adam and Eve to access the Gnosis, or divine wisdom, needed to break free from Yaldabaoth's illusion. In this sense, the tree wasn't forbidden at all. It was a gift, one that Yaldabaoth tried to keep from them through lies and fear. Let's talk about the serpent. In traditional narratives, the serpent is vilified as the tempter, the one who led humanity astray. But in Gnostic tradition, the serpent plays a very different role. It's a messenger of Sophia, sent to guide Adam and Eve toward enlightenment. The serpent doesn't trick them, it tells them the truth. It reveals that eating from the tree of knowledge won't lead to death, as Yaldabaoth claimed, but to the realization of their true nature. The serpent is essentially the hero of the story, exposing the lies of Yaldabaoth and empowering humanity to take their first steps toward freedom. The tree of knowledge also introduces an important theme in Gnostic thought, the idea that true growth comes through struggle. By eating the fruit, Adam and Eve didn't just gain knowledge, they gained the ability to question, to challenge, and to evolve. The suffering imposed by Yaldabaoth wasn't the result of divine wrath. It was the price of freedom, the consequence of stepping out of the illusion and into the reality of their own divine potential. Let's get into the darker side of history, the deliberate erasure of the Gnostic worldview and its radical take on creation, knowledge, and liberation. The suppression of these ideas wasn't just an accident of time, it was a calculated effort to maintain power and control by religious institutions that viewed these alternative teachings as a threat. The story begins in the early centuries of Christianity. In the first few hundred years after the death of Jesus, there wasn't one unified Christianity. There were countless sects, each interpreting his teachings in different ways. Among these groups were the Gnostics, whose writings offered a vastly different understanding of God, creation, and humanity's purpose. But as Christianity became more organized and eventually aligned with the political power of the Roman Empire, the Gnostic texts and their ideas became a target. The Gnostics challenged the authority of the emerging church in ways that couldn't be ignored. They rejected the idea of a single, omnipotent God as the creator of the material world. Instead, they described a fractured cosmology, where the physical universe was the work of an imperfect and malevolent being, Yaldabaoth. This stood in direct opposition to the Church's message, which depended on the Old Testament's portrayal of God as the supreme creator. If Yaldabaoth wasn't the true God, then the Church's authority, rooted in his laws and doctrines, was called into question. This conflict came to a head in the 4th century when Christianity became the official religion of the Roman Empire under Emperor Constantine. With the Council of Nicaea in 325 CE, the Church began to solidify its doctrines, defining what was orthodox and labeling everything else as heresy. Gnostic ideas, with their rejection of the material world and their emphasis on personal spiritual enlightenment, were among the first to be condemned. The Church didn't stop at simply denouncing Gnostic beliefs. They actively sought to destroy Gnostic texts and communities. The writings that survived, like the Gospel of Thomas, the Apocryphon of John, and the Gospel of Philip, were only preserved because they were hidden away by their followers. In 1945, a cache of these texts was discovered in Nag Hammadi, Egypt, revealing a treasure trove of Gnostic knowledge that had been buried for centuries to protect it from destruction. But why was the Church so determined to erase these teachings? The answer lies in control. Gnosticism emphasized personal spiritual awakening, gnosis, or direct knowledge of the divine, over obedience to external authorities. It taught that salvation didn't come from following rules or rituals, but from recognizing the divine spark within yourself. This idea directly undermined the hierarchical structure of the Church, which positioned itself as the sole mediator between humanity and God. If people could access the divine directly, the Church's role and its power became unnecessary. The suppression wasn't just intellectual, it was brutal. Gnostic communities were persecuted, their leaders were executed, and their writings were burned. The Church labeled them as heretics, demonized their teachings, and rewrote history to portray them as fringe lunatics. But the reality was far more nuanced. The Gnostics were thinkers, philosophers, and spiritual seekers who dared to question the dominant narrative. This erasure wasn't limited to the Gnostics. Other groups with similar beliefs, like the Cathars in medieval Europe, met similar fates. The Cathars, who shared many Gnostic ideas about the material world being a trap, were declared heretics by the Catholic Church and wiped out in a bloody crusade. Their books and teachings were destroyed, and their communities were obliterated. The pattern is clear: whenever a belief system challenged the Church's authority, it was met with suppression and violence. What's truly remarkable is how much of the Gnostic tradition managed to survive despite these efforts. The Nag Hammadi texts, along with scattered references in the writings of early Church fathers who opposed them, give us a glimpse into a world of thought that was almost lost forever. These texts reveal a spiritual framework that values questioning, seeking, and discovering over blind faith and obedience. Let's talk about the endgame, Yaldabaoth's downfall, and what the Gnostics believed about humanity's ultimate destiny. The story doesn't end with Adam and Eve being cast out of Eden or with the suppression of Gnostic teachings. According to these ancient texts, the narrative stretches far beyond, into a cosmic struggle for liberation. The Gnostics believed that the material world, created by Yaldabaoth, was fundamentally flawed and temporary. Yaldabaoth's rule, though oppressive, wasn't eternal. In fact, they saw it as inherently fragile. Why? Because the spark of divinity that Sophia implanted in humanity was destined to outshine the illusions of the material world. Yaldabaoth's power rested entirely on deception, on convincing humanity that the physical realm was all there was, that he was the supreme being. The moment people saw through this, his power would crumble. The key to this awakening was gnosis, or divine knowledge. This wasn't just intellectual understanding, it was a profound realization of one's divine origin and connection to the pleroma, the true realm of light and unity. The Gnostics taught that every person carried a fragment of this divine essence, and their ultimate purpose was to awaken it. This awakening wasn't about escaping responsibility or rejecting the world, it was about transcending the illusions of Yaldabaoth's creation and reclaiming the truth. One of the most fascinating aspects of Gnostic thought is its portrayal of humanity as active participants in this cosmic drama. In traditional religious narratives, salvation is something granted by an external deity. But in Gnosticism, humanity plays a crucial role in bringing about the downfall of Yaldabaoth. The more people awaken to their divine spark, the weaker Yaldabaoth becomes. It's like dismantling a tyrant's empire from the inside out, one enlightened mind at a time. Yaldabaoth himself isn't left untouched by this process. The Gnostics didn't just see him as a villain to be defeated, but as a being who could potentially be redeemed. In some texts, Sophia intervenes in Yaldabaoth's fate, seeking to bring him back into the fold of the divine. This adds a fascinating layer of complexity to the story. Yaldabaoth isn't an eternal adversary, he's a product of ignorance, and his downfall isn't just about destruction, but about restoring balance to the cosmos. The Gnostics also described a future where the material world itself would dissolve. This wasn't an apocalyptic vision of fire and brimstone, but a return to unity. The physical universe, they believed, was a temporary construct, a kind of shadow cast by Yaldabaoth's flawed creation. Once humanity fully awakened and the divine sparks were reunited with the pleroma, the material world would no longer have a reason to exist. Yaldabaoth's illusions would collapse, and the true light would shine unimpeded. What's particularly compelling is how this vision redefines the concept of salvation. It's not about appeasing a deity or escaping punishment, it's about reclaiming what was always yours. The Gnostics weren't waiting for a savior to fix things for them. They believed the power to dismantle Yaldabaoth's empire was already within them, within all of us. That's a radical message, especially in a world dominated by systems that demand obedience and conformity. So, what does the end of Yaldabaoth mean for humanity? It's the ultimate liberation, not just from physical suffering, but from the illusions that keep us trapped in fear, ignorance, and division. The Gnostic vision of the future is one where the barriers between the divine and humanity dissolve, where the spark of light within every person is fully realized, and where the false rulers of the material world are rendered powerless. Thanks for sticking with me through this exploration of one of the most fascinating and controversial narratives in human history. There's so much more to uncover in the Gnostic texts and the truths they dared to tell, so if you're as intrigued as I am, make sure to subscribe, like, and share your thoughts in the comments. Until next time, keep questioning, keep seeking, and remember, the spark of truth is always within you.